this battle that I had been waging and trying to get help with, I was alone in it. And I had spent so much of my life feeling alone that I was just exhausted from it. And I set a date for 1 month down the road that I was going to end my life. There are the 3 areas of my life that I'm struggling with, that I've struggled with for years, but are on the verge of ending my life over. I can't accept and live with my mental illness, but I got to do the work.
Today's guest is Charlene Madden. She'd admittedly spent most of her life in a decade of darkness after experiencing over 9 years of sexualized trauma at the hands of her godfather, a decade of domestic violence, and 3+ decades of mental illness and suicide ideology. She was just 2 days away from taking her life when she attended a women's workshop where everything changed. She was able to take off her blinders, begin the healing process, and find her purpose by turning her mess into a message of hope, evolution, and transformation that she now shares with people all over the world. Charlene is a mother of 3 amazing children, a wife, daughter, and Reiki practitioner, women's empowerment coach, and creator of the Ignite Your Life personal development workshop held every November. Welcome, Charlene.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. So after reading that, I have no idea how you can answer the next question. What is one of the most courageous things you have done?
I think most of the time we look at courage as being different because courage is different for everybody. I looked at courage and it's been different at different points of my life. Sometimes courage has just been getting through that day. Sometimes it's been getting through that second, because sometimes I've lived my life just second by second trying to not end my life because I've been so badly depressed. Some people would say getting on a stage and sharing my story and being so open and honest is courageous. And I think that probably for me is one of the biggest, most courageous things that I can do, is just open up, my heart and allow myself to be vulnerable when I spent so much of my life in a state of vulnerability. So allowing myself again to be vulnerable is pretty courageous, I think.
Yes, absolutely. And I couldn't agree with you more. For some people, being courageous is just getting up every morning out of bed. So I can totally understand the different scales. So tell me about the time you were 2 days away from taking your own life. You attended a woman's workshop and everything changed. What was it, that pivotal moment?
I'm a firm believer that we usually are put in at the right place at the right time. At least that's how it happened for myself. I had been fighting a really bad part of the depression that I suffered from. I had actually started seeing a psychiatrist, which for me was a huge step, trying to go and talk to someone and get help. It wasn't working. I remember, having a conversation with her, and I'm a pretty, my personality is just tell me what to do and I'll do it. I was raised by my grandmother and I have old school work. It's like, I'll do the work, just tell me what to do. And I remember saying to the psychiatrist, tell me what you did to fix your depression. And she kind of looked at me, her eyes glazed over, and she said, well, Charlene, I've never experienced depression. And I was thinking to myself in that moment, then how can you tell me you understand how I feel? Because unless you've felt this, unless you've sat in the darkness, you really can't understand how it truly feels. So I think in that moment, I felt completely alone, that this battle that I had been waging and trying to get help with, I was alone in it. And I had spent so much of my life feeling alone that I was just exhausted from it. I had developed fibromyalgia, which is chronic pain disorder. So I was in pain physically, I was in pain, mentally, emotionally, and I was just tired of the pain. So I walked out of that appointment and I set a date for 1 month down the road that I was going to end my life. Wanted to make sure, I still had a teenage son at home. He was 16, I believe, at the time. And I wanted to make sure everything was as prepared as possible, and that, it's hard for some people to understand. I wanted to make sure I was setting him up for as comfortable a life as I could. And
Mm-hmm.
I went to work and was pretending that everything was okay. And this was about 2 weeks before the date I had set. I had a coworker approach me and say, "Hey, there's this women's workshop. Would you like to come with me?" And I was like, "No, I'm good," because it was the last thing I wanted to do. I thought my days of trying to help my life were over. And she's like, "Please, I
Yes.
want to go, but I don't want to go alone." And that was kind of always my weakness. I cared about other people and I wanted to help other people.
Mm,
And I thought, wow, she really needs to attend. Fine, we'll just go. What a great way to keep pretending that everything is fine. No one's going to suspect anything. And it
mhm,
fell, the workshop started 2 days before the day I had set. So I had set the date on a Monday. The workshop started on Saturday. I
mhm,
pulled up to that workshop with my hunting rifle in the back seat of my car, and I was ready just to get through the 2 days I had to get through and then go and end my life. I had the location
mm,
picked out. As I said, I had the weapon. I knew, my decision was made, I thought. And I walked into that room, and I don't know if your listeners can understand. I think a lot of us can. I walked into that
mhm.
room and I felt so out of place. I felt
Yeah.
like I didn't belong, and it just, again, emphasized how alone I felt. All these women
Mm,
seemed to have it together, well dressed, excited to be there, talking, and I can hear them setting goals as I'm making my way through the room to my table. And I felt like such a
mhm.
fraud, sitting there and listening to them talk, because here I was just planning to end my life. So I took my seat
Wow.
and I got through half of the day. And of course, nothing was, reaching me. They were talking about finances and they were talking about
Mhm,
health and wellness. And of course, these were things that at this point did not apply to me whatsoever.
mhm.
A woman takes the stage and she's bald and she starts talking about living with alopecia and how,
Uh-huh.
she developed it early in her youth and how it really affected her feelings of self-worth and her self-love, how she turned to alcohol and drugs
Mm,
and contemplated suicide, as a way of
mm,
dealing with this. And her life changed only in the moment that she realized she needed to stop looking to society to validate her and her worth.
mm.
And she needed to start with just loving herself. And I'm kind of listening to her speak, and I thought, wow, how different could my life have been had I learned to love myself? I had not grown up with my parents.
Mhm.
I had been placed to live with my grandparents. It's actually my grandfather that molested me. So I went through, nine, as you said, 9 years of, sexual abuse at the hands of my
Mhm.
grandfather. I didn't feel at that love that, children so desperately need in those beginning years. And I had spent my life
Yes.
searching for love in all of these dysfunctional relationships. I thought, wow, what if I loved myself and that was enough? And I kind of brushed it off and I thought, okay, whatever, it's too late for that. Then the next speaker gets on stage and it was a teacher and she
Mm.
started talking about living with mental health and depression and how for
Wow.
2 decades her life had been completely controlled by being in this darkness, this state of, not wanting to be
Mm,
here. She had fought it. She fought that darkness for so many years. And it was actually the moment that she accepted that her mental illness was a part of her. It's kind of like living
wow.
with diabetes, like it affects
Mhm.
your life and you're going to have it for the rest of your life, but you can embrace it and create healthy life even with it. And she said, she pulled, instead of pushing the darkness away, she pulled the darkness in so that the light could
Mm,
shine into the darkness. And I thought to myself, wow, I've spent so long fighting my mental illness and my depression. What if I could learn to live with it in a healthy way?
mhm.
It's never going to go away. What if I could learn to live with it and accept it? And again, that's another part I need to accept and love in myself. And I'm kind of sitting there, and again, I just brush off this message that I'm receiving because I think it's too late. And then the
Mhm.
last speaker gets on stage, and it is a gentleman, and he starts talking about living with mental illness, having a failed marriage, being an alcoholic, addicted to alcohol and pain medication, and how he had, lost custody of his kids, and how he had spent a year trying to find a perfect mix of pain medication and alcohol so that he could commit suicide by, overdosing, but make it look like an accident because he
Okay.
knew if, it was a suicide, his children would not receive any life insurance money, and he wanted to ensure his kids were taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
And how on a rare occasion his ex-wife asked him to watch the kids, and it was actually on that night that he found that perfect mix of alcohol and pain medication. With his kids sleeping in the bedroom next to him, he was laying on the couch slowly overdosing, and he knew it. And
Mm-hmm.
he was fighting that internal battle of, okay, I'm finally getting what I want. I'm finally getting to die. My life is going to end, but yet here my children are in the next room, and what is this going to do to my kids?
Mm-hmm.
He heard a voice inside of him, and it was like, no, not like this, not today. And he was able to get to his cell phone. He was able to call emergency services, and his whole life changed. He got clean
Wow.
and sober. He got, everything, of course, came out, all of his depression and mental illness. So he was
Mm-hmm.
able to get in and get treatment, and his whole life changed. And he realized in that moment that he had a story that so many other people were experiencing, and that
Mm-hmm.
maybe by him sharing and being vulnerable and sharing his story, he could help other people. So he's done talking, and I'm sitting in my seat at this point, and I'm kind of looking around the room as if I think that there's a hidden camera somewhere, and it's pointing right at me because it knows exactly what I've been experiencing, because I'm sitting there going, what is going on right now? Like, what are the chances that I came to an event that I didn't want to come to? And I'm
Mm-hmm.
sitting in the seat, and I've just heard three stories that are the three areas of my life that I'm struggling with, that I've struggled with for years, but are on the verge of ending my life over. And I'm thinking, maybe I've gotten quiet enough, that internal fight that I had constantly has quieted enough that I've heard the messages that I was supposed to hear, that I can love myself, that I'm worthy of that love, that I don't need anyone else's love to prove my worth other than my own, that I can accept and live with my mental illness, but I got to do the work. I got to be
Mm-hmm.
responsible for doing that work. And that maybe everything that I've gone through has equipped me to help other people, which is what I've always wanted to do since I was a little girl. I wanted to help other people. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
this has equipped me to understand, like my psychiatrist I felt couldn't. Maybe I can relate and share my story, and other people can say, wow, like, yeah, that's how I'm feeling. How did you get better? Oh, this is what you did. Okay, maybe I can
Mm-hmm.
try that. And maybe I can just
Mm-hmm.
start to try to break that stigma surrounding child sexual abuse and mental illness, and say, you know what, it's okay, you're not alone. Because all those years I felt so alone, I knew other people had experienced the things that I had experienced. I knew that. But to hear people share their stories so openly and honestly and vulnerably, it just completely touched my soul. And as I was sitting in that
Absolutely.
seat, I made the decision that, you know what, I don't want to die. I want to
Mm-hmm.
live. And I don't want to just live, I want to thrive. I want to help other people. And this was the moment I was supposed to experience so that I could see that and see that, you know what, there is more, and there is something positive that can come out of this. So I actually went and approached the lady that held the workshop, and I said, I
Mm-hmm.
would love to sit down with you and share with you what this workshop has meant to me, because I felt so indebted to her, because had she not had that workshop, I wouldn't be here today.
Oh
And,
gosh.
and I,
Mm.
I wanted to pay respect to her for that. And I remember sitting down, and telling her my story and saying, I would love to come back next year and speak on your stage, just so people understand how important these events can be, how life changing they can be. And she was like, I would absolutely love to have you. So I went back the next year to that same workshop, and I spoke on her stage and shared my story. I remember at the end of my story, and I say this all the time, it's like, if by sharing my story I can save just one life,
Mm.
then everything I have experienced has been worth it. Kind of got off the stage, and I was trying to rush out of the room because I was so nervous after being so vulnerable. And I had a woman that was in the audience stop me and she said, Charlene, you know how you said you wanted to save a life? And I said, yeah. And she
Mm-hmm.
goes, I just want you to know that you did. And she turned and walked away. And I was
Wow.
kind of standing there in awe. What did she just say? Right. And then I heard that little voice that I had, learned to listen to. And it said,
Yes.
great, now let's go find one more. So for me, every
Mm-hmm.
day it's trying to reach
Mm.
someone, to share my story, and to let people know that they're not alone. And every day it's a search to find that one more person that needs to hear this message today. So that's why I love coming on
Yeah,
and sharing my story. So
that is incredible. I would personally like to say I'm so grateful you went to that workshop. You are still here. And it's unbelievable how we can hear the right messages at the right time. Sometimes, it's not about rushing around, it's about slowing down, allowing ourselves to hear our internal voices, whether they actually say anything or not. It's feeling those feelings. And to be in that room and hear stories, I can totally understand how they mirrored your life in some way.
yeah.
And you're right in saying you are here because you are sharing your story and helping someone else. And even for that lady to come up to you, I mean, that's amazing. I really like to acknowledge you for that. That's absolutely fantastic. You are here for a purpose. Your presence is needed to help others. So I'd like to say that as well. So I'm
Yeah.
really grateful that you are. It's been absolutely a journey, I'm sure. Because, we all know healing is so important, and it affects every area of our life and relationships, even with our children, our parenting. Can you relate to the effects it has on every relationship in our life?
Oh, absolutely. I struggled as a parent. I mean, like,
Mm-hmm.
I was not a good mom. Growing up, I was, a severe alcoholic when my children were
Mm-hmm.
little, because that was the only coping mechanism I had to deal with the emotions. I thought if I could just numb how I'm feeling, I can get through a day. I was
Mm-hmm.
always a working mom, so I mean, I was either at work or I was at home trying to exist. Now, did my children know that I drank as heavily as I did? No, I was really good at hiding that from them, but it
Mm-hmm.
definitely affected my parenting abilities. And I mean, when I was 28, I actually left my marriage and my home. I remember
Mm-hmm.
sitting down with my husband and saying, I can't be here right now. Like, I was so suicidal that I was afraid I was going to end my life and my kids were going to find me. That's why I connected
Mm-hmm.
to that gentleman's story, planning on hanging myself in my home. And I was afraid my kids were going to come home from school and find me. And so I left my home. And when I did that, thinking I was doing it for my children, the best thing for my children, all it did was send me into a tailspin, because I realized in my mind I had just repeated the cycle that my parents had done to me. Because my parents, my father was a severe alcoholic. He let alcohol
Mm-hmm.
affect his, parenting abilities. And my mom had left the home. And I thought, wow, I've just completely repeated this generational cycle of trauma that my
Yeah.
parents put. I just did it to my kids. I allowed alcohol to control my life and I just left my kids. So all that guilt that I had, put me into a tailspin. And it's, my relationship with my children has just grown over the last, 6 years that I have been healing, because I've done the work, and a
Yes.
big thing for myself, and I say this to everyone, like especially as parents. I remember sitting in a social worker's office. I'm sitting in kind of a boardroom, and there's social workers all at one end, and my oldest daughter, who was experiencing some mental health issues herself.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to get care for her, and her lashing out at me and saying how angry she was at me, rightly so, and how bad of a parent I was, and allowing her to feel her feelings because they were hers to feel. And I remember sitting there and saying, it was like a moment where I gave myself grace. And I think it was such an important moment. And I think as parents, we need to give ourselves this moment more. But I gave myself
Mm.
grace in that moment of saying, you know what, I did the best I could with the tools that I had,
Yes.
and I did. I wasn't given the tools as a child. When my abuse came out, I received no follow-up care. There was no counseling, no therapy. I got diagnosed at 16 as being manic depressive bipolar. There was no counseling, no therapy. There was never any follow-up for the, how I was feeling. So really, I didn't have the tools to do what I needed to do. So I was really just doing the best I could with what I had. So being able to acknowledge that in that moment and give myself grace, but also realizing that that meant I owed that grace to everyone else in my life. My mom was just doing the best she could with the tools she had. My mother had also been molested by her father, my grandfather. So she had experienced her own trauma and was doing the best she could. My dad, he was just doing the best he could as well. He was a severe alcoholic, ran in his family. He was doing the best he could. Even, my grandmother, and even going as far as my grandfather, which people have a hard time sometimes wrapping their head around. I even had to look at my grandfather and go, I don't know what his childhood was like. I don't know what he experienced to create the monster that he was. Maybe he was just doing the best he could with what tools he had. And letting that go and just embracing the grace and releasing it and going, okay, now it's my responsibility. And when I work with clients myself, I always work on a 3S program, the self-love, but self-responsibility. And sometimes the self-responsibility is the hardest aspect for people to accept and move through, because it's really easy to point fingers at everybody else, like my parents, my grandfather. I could point all the fingers of blame at them that I want, but the reality was my life was where it was at because of the decisions I had made over the last few years. I stayed in an abusive relationship because I made those choices. I could have left. I didn't. I stayed. So I had to start accepting responsibility. But by doing that, it gave me the power to start moving in the right direction. And that part of that was healing the relationship with my kids and taking the responsibility for, where I'm at, or, where I was at, but also giving them the lesson of, yeah, you didn't have the greatest childhood. I get that. But now it's your responsibility to move forward and move in the direction you want. And I'll give you the tools. I will be here to support you. But that journey is yours to walk. So.
Yeah. Definitely. And that's absolutely fantastic. And I just want to touch on one of the points you said there, that it's about, even it was your grandfather that was sexually abusing you, it's having compassion for them, for what they're going through. Because here's the thing, some people don't realize it's about you, it's not about them. It's about healing. So if you're going to heal and truly heal, you need to forgive, and the forgiveness is yours, not theirs. People can do other things to you, but how you deal with them, like you said, it's from the inside out. It's not about how people are reacting to us. It's how we are brave enough to take action then, and responsibility, and respect ourselves. And forgiveness is very much part of sexual abuse. I mean, I shared my story in my first episode of my podcast. I never thought I'd be sharing my sexual abuse story, but here we are. Unfortunately, still to today, there's still so much abuse, and it needs to stop.
Absolutely.
And it is by us sharing our stories, we are helping others to realize they are not alone. There is hope. Get the help. Like you say, if it's just one person we can help, we've done our job. It's almost like a duty. We've done our duty.
Yeah, absolutely. I look at what I do now. I have a picture on my fridge, and it's me as a little girl with my dog outside. And I think I was 3 or 4 when that picture was taken. And I look at that little girl and I think, that little girl didn't have a voice. She couldn't tell what was happening. She couldn't, share her story. If nothing else, my duty is to that, 3-year-old little girl inside of me, to keep allowing her to have a voice, to say, hey, this is what happened, but I'm okay. And I think that's so important. And touching on what you said about, forgiveness, it doesn't mean we're forgetting, right, what happened, because you can't forget. But my grandfather's long deceased. I heard an analogy that, not forgiving is like you're drinking the poison and expecting them to die.
Absolutely. I love that saying.
Yeah, it's like my grandfather had moved on, with his life. And even now, like he's not here. So I'm not hurting him by not forgiving him because it's not impacting his life. But I am hurting myself by holding on to all of that anger and that, that animosity that I was holding on to. So yeah, just being able to release that, it's so, and it's created the best relationship that I've ever had with my mother has been, coming from my being able to forgive her for, allowing me to go live with her dad, knowing what monster he was. I was so angry at her at the time, and even being able to say, you know what, I forgive you. I know you're doing the best that you could. Let's move forward and develop the relationship now. So it's some of the best relationships I've ever had in my life are the relationships I have now. So, but Brilliant. It's work. It's work for, on the relationships and work on myself. So it's a daily thing. So.
Yes. Yeah. We're evolving all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And yes, I'd like to touch on the self-worth. Half the time, or a lot of the time, people don't feel they're worth enough healing. It's not worth it. I'm not good enough. And sometimes there's just got to be that flicker, that flips, that turning point. And it might be something small. And if you can hear somebody else sharing their story and you align with that, and there's a part of that just feels, actually, hold on, I could help someone else. And like you said, you're a person that always wants to help others. Let's face it, you went to that workshop to help someone else initially, and that's brilliant. So it's in your nature to help others, definitely. Even in a crisis like that, you weren't thinking about yourself, and that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's about having that and understanding we are worth it. Of course we are. I know how hard it can be communicating to your friends and family your actual life. It's about opening up. So how do you find it that was for you? Did you feel you could open up? Was there people you had, a close friend or someone, or did you feel you couldn't open up to anyone?
Again, and this is probably from my grandmother's upbringing, I was a pretty independent person. And, again, I never wanted to be a burden on anyone else. I didn't want, I was always like, people are going through all their own stuff. They don't need to know mine. I don't want to worry people. I was always in that protective mode of not, dragging anybody else in. So that's why I was so alone. But I mean, and that's one of the things that we do is that, and especially women, but I mean, it's way harder for men that are experiencing this, because women, we have usually relationships that we can go to. Men don't. So I always speak, passionately about men's mental health, because I know they don't have the same outlets and support that we have. But with that being said, I wasn't talking about it at the time, but I did afterwards. Like, one of the first things I did was I contacted a really good friend of mine, and I said, I called him up and I said, hey, can I meet you? And can you take all of my guns? Because I'm an avid hunter, or as we were talking about, I live out in the mountains here. So I'm like, can you please take all my guns? He didn't ask any questions. He said, sure, I'll meet you and pick them up. You just let me know when you want them back. Now, I had just a few years prior to, this is part of what caused my downward spiral. I had the person I was in the really bad domestic abuse relationship with, he had actually committed suicide. He had shot and killed himself. Imagine that when I asked my friend to take the guns, he probably thought it was because the guns were bothering me at the time, being in the house, because of how my ex-partner had taken his life. So, but he didn't ask any questions. He just took everything. I actually went to my boss at work, and I said, I took in a little baggie with all my pain medication and prescriptions. And I said, can you hold these for me? And if I need one, I'll come and ask you for one. And he was like, absolutely, I can do that for you. The way of discreetly, in asking for help without coming right out and having to share my story. And then I started having dialogue with the people closest to me and saying, hey, I've been struggling, and this is where I was at. And I started with the people that were like the closest girlfriends that I had. And, I got the standard answer of, well, why didn't you just call me? Why didn't you just tell me? Right. And that's a standard answer that I hear all the time is that, well, why didn't you just call me? I'm here for you at any time. And yes, of course we do. Right. But again, I didn't want to be that burden to people. And I said, this is my way of calling you now, is just to be able to have the conversation. And I actually found that the more I went to people and opened up and shared what I was experiencing, the more light came in. Like I was able to, it was like I wasn't allowing the shame, because sometimes, we feel shame of, especially as women and parents and moms, like we want to hold it all together for everybody else. And, and I had this shame that I wasn't able to hold it all together, because here I was such a strong person. I had, gone through and survived so many hard things, but yet I wasn't able to hold it together. So I had that shame. So the more I shared my story, the more I was able to let go of some of that shame, because just sharing it, I had, other people saying, yeah, I know, I've felt that way. And that, it helped me with the, wow, it's not just me. There are other people that are feeling that way, and maybe they don't feel alone now either. So finding, that one ride or die person that you can find that you can share your story with, but understanding that by holding it in and not sharing it, you're giving that darkness dominion over your insides, right? So, sharing it and confiding in people and releasing that shame or whatever emotion you're feeling, it'll let that light come in. So powerful.
Definitely. Yes, absolutely. And what resources do you recommend, daily tools, tips, to anyone that wants to start their path on recovery and healing? I know it's a tough question, but is there anything you could give them?
I would always recommend finding someone professionally that you can help, or that can help you. When I started going to therapists, I would ask, have you experienced, that's usually the first question I ask, have you ever experienced mental health, right? Because that's my first connection that I need to know, right? So find someone that understands what you're going through. There's so many support groups. And I think going through COVID, that's the one thing I learned, and I actually found as a real positive, was there are so many support groups and opportunities just online where you can do it anonymously, and you can do it, if you're uncomfortable going out and, sharing and putting your true self out there, there's support groups that you can join online where, no one knows your name, Definitely. No one knows your face or whatever, right? If you feel uncomfortable that way. So, but just find people that are on the healing path. Find people that have maybe been where you are, and or maybe even just a couple steps ahead of you rather than miles ahead Absolutely. Of you. And and just know that you're not alone. So there's so many good books out there, like find I'm an avid voracious reader, so I love to find books that talk about abuse and shame and trauma and things like that. Brene Brown is an amazing writer.
Definitely.
So yeah, read, find support groups, do whatever you have to, but just get through the day. Just take it one day at a time, 1 minute at a time if you have to.
So where can the listeners find you online?
My website is www.charlenemadden-speaker.com. I do a workshop myself, as we were saying, because originally the lady that was running the workshop that saved my life, the one I spoke at was her last workshop. She kind of was like, okay, I've done 5. I need a break because it's a lot of work. And I, knowing the power that those workshops could have, was like, geez, someone needs to step up and do these workshops. And again, I heard that little voice that said, what about you? And so I decided to create my own workshop. And I did the first one in 2020 live. Last year, because of COVID, we did it virtually. And this year, November 5th and 6th, we're doing a mix of live and virtual. So if you want to check it out online on Facebook, it is Ignite Your Life. I have some amazing speakers booked to come in and come in virtually as well. And that's a great way to create impact for your life and be around people and be part of a community of people that are working for better, because I think that's the biggest thing. Sometimes we need to surround ourselves with people who are growing in the same direction that we're growing, rather than people who are, staying stuck in that dark place. You got to surround yourself with like-minded people. So yeah, and you can find me on Facebook at Charlene Madden Speaker. And I always like to throw out that I know what it's like to sit in the dark, and I know what it's like to feel all alone. So if you feel like you don't have anybody else to talk to, if you don't feel like you have anybody that you can connect with or who will understand, please reach out to me online. Message me on Facebook, contact me on my website. I always say to people, I will come and sit in the dark with you until you're ready to rise up into the light, because I don't want anyone to feel alone like I did.
So what is your website?
www.charlenemadden-speaker.com.
Thank you for sharing your courageous journey with us today. And by doing so, I know you have helped so many others. And I personally would like to acknowledge you for doing the work on yourself and then going on to help others. And that's what it's about. So thank you, Charlene Madden.
Thank you. And thank you for your platform, because you as well are creating healing and providing, opportunity for people to hear stories that are going to impact their lives. So thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you. So my final question to you is, what is your definition of courage? Because we are all about Create the Courage to Be Fearless podcast. So what is your definition of courage?
Stepping into the life that you're meant to lead. That's, for me, finding that purpose and not being afraid to chase it. And again, as I said, it's being vulnerable and opening yourself up and doing the work. It's hard work to do to change your life. So have the courage, do the work.